White billionaire family mocked the black couple. Then they canceled their $30 deal. The chandeliers glowed like stars suspended over a sea of tuxedos and satin gowns. Laughter rose in polished waves, the kind that fills a room when the wealthy are certain the world bends only for them. Silver trays floated between clusters of guests, each flute of champagne carried as if it were a badge of belonging. And then silence cracked the air. A glass tipped. Red liquid sprayed across the marble foyer, streaking a silk gown in dark stains that spread like fire. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The only sound was the sharp clink of glass fragments scattering across the polished floor. Then came the first words. "You don't belong here." They were spoken with a voice so firm, so sure of its authority, that even those across the room turned to listen. Margaret Whitmore, matriarch of one of the city's oldest families, stood at the center of the foyer, diamonds gleaming at her throat. Her gaze wasn't fixed on the floor where the glass had shattered, but on the woman now standing drenched in wine, Elaine Brooks. Her husband David reached toward her sleeve, but Elaine lifted her chin instead. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a napkin. She didn't let the stain define her. Still, the room erupted, not with outrage, but with amusement. A smirk here, a chuckle there, and soon laughter spilled faster than the champagne had moments earlier. Phones rose in unison, not discreetly, boldly. Dozens of lenses locked onto the scene, hungry to capture humiliation as if it were entertainment. Whispered jokes rippled like sparks. She must have wandered in by mistake. Probably staff. Look at her dress now. She'd be gone before dessert. For anyone else, the instinct would have been to retreat, to let security handle the jeers and shuffle out unseen. But Elaine's eyes didn't waver, even as Margaret's heels clicked toward her, like a drumbeat of authority. "I said you don't belong here, and you never will." The words carried across the marble like a gavel striking wood. Guests leaned closer, eager for more. A young man in a tuxedo, champagne glass sloshing in his hand, raised it in mock salute. "Careful with the silverware," he slurred. "Wouldn't want to lose the good forks." His friends doubled over with cruel laughter. And yet Elaine remained upright, her expression calm enough to unsettle those who expected tears or shame. She held her phone lightly at her side, the screen glowing faintly, as if waiting for the right moment. Across the room, David's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. Their silence was its own defiance. A crowd began to circle, drawn by the spectacle, emboldened by the Whitmore's arrogance. A woman in a sequined gown leaned close to her companion. "Do you know who she is?" she whispered. "No idea," came the reply, laced with derision. "But I know who she isn't." Laughter again, sharp and biting. Phones clicked, videos streamed live to feeds beyond those glittering walls. In minutes, strangers far from the party would see the scene exactly as it unfolded. A powerful family humiliating the couple who stood their ground without saying a word. Margaret raised her chin higher, savoring the moment. "Security," she called, her voice unwavering. "Escorted them out before they embarrassed themselves further." Two guards stepped forward, expressions tight, bodies angled toward Elaine and David. One looked eager, the other uncertain. And still, Elaine did not move. Her stillness began to press back against the noise, her eyes fixed on the matriarch who believed she could erase dignity with a sentence. The crowd's laughter softened. Murmurs replaced it. Even those who had mocked seconds earlier sensed something was shifting. The couple did not plead, they did not argue, they stood in quiet defiance, and that silence carried weight no one in that hall expected. If you believe dignity is worth defending, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. And let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? Back in the foyer, the tension thickened. Margaret narrowed her eyes, waiting for the guards to finish what she had begun. David shifted slightly, his hand brushing against Elaine's arm in quiet solidarity. She tilted her phone upward just enough for the glow to catch the guard's eyes. For the first time all evening, hesitation rippled across the Whitmore ranks. The guards froze. The crowd hushed. The weight of those few inches, the simple act of lifting a phone, spoke louder than the insults that had filled the air. No one yet understood what that gesture meant. Not the Whitmores, not the guests, not even the guards poised to remove her. But in that unshaken glance, in that single movement, there was a promise. one that would shatter far more than crystal glasses before the night ended. What no one in that marble hall knew was that the very couple being locked controlled the single deal keeping the Whitmore empire alive. Elaine's gown clung wet against her frame, the deep stain spreading like an open wound across the fabric. Yet she stood with a stillness that unsettled those watching. Her shoulders remained square, her chin lifted, her gaze locked not on the mess dripping onto the floor, but on the woman who had hurled words sharper than the shards of glass at her feet. Her silence was not submission. It was liturgy. Decades earlier, her grandmother, hands worn from endless double shifts, had taught her the posture of dignity. Never let anyone tell you where you belong. Hold yourself upright, even when the world bends against you. That lesson steadied her now, in a room where wealth sought to weaponize humiliation. Margaret Whitmore reveled in the moment. Pearls graced her throat, a smile cut thin across her painted lips. She thrived on hierarchy, measuring worth not by merit but by skin, accent, and pedigree. To her, Elaine was an intruder, an affront to the order she believed was hers to maintain. At Margaret's side loomed Charles Whitmore, tall but weary, his tuxedo a mask for a man drowning in obligations he could no longer control. His expression hardened, not out of strength, but out of desperation. To him, Elaine and David were not people, only distractions from the illusion of power he fought daily to project. Further back, Brandon Whitmore leaned against the bar, his glass half empty and his smirk full. At 28, wealth had shielded him from consequence. Every opportunity squandered, every business handed to him dissolved in failure, yet entitlement clung to him like a tailored suit. He raised his glass again, eyes glazed with intoxication. Did someone order maid service? Because I think our bathrooms could use attention. Laughter burst from his circle of equally pampered companions, their voices carrying above the murmurs. Some clapped him on the back, others nearly spilled their drinks in delight. Their mockery was not clever. It was cruelty disguised as wit, sharpened by the thrill of punching down. Sophia Whitmore, polished in a satin gown, wielded her venom differently. Her words were quieter, designed to slice without raising her voice. She leaned toward a guest, her smile delicate, her earrings glittering like tiny daggers. "She's probably looking for the kitchen," she whispered, just loud enough for the surrounding ears. The guest laughed, the sound spreading like contagion, until half the room had heard. Phones stayed high. Some guests zoomed in on Elaine's stained gown, eager to catch the humiliation from every angle. A few giggled, hiding their mouths behind jeweled hands. Others smirked openly, emboldened by the family's lead. David shifted slightly, his hand brushing Elaine's arm, a silent gesture of solidarity. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Both of them knew words thrown in anger would only feed the spectacle. Instead, Elaine stood motionless, her phone still faintly glowing at her side. Every second of her silence began to feel heavier than the jeers. The crowd wanted tears, begging, outrage, anything to confirm superiority. Instead, they were given poise. And poise is difficult to mock. Even a few guests who had joined in began to falter, their laughter trailing into uncertainty. The longer Elaine remained steady, the more obvious the contrast became. On one side, arrogance dressed in satin and diamonds. On the other, dignity in a ruined gown that could not erase her presence. Margaret, sensing the hesitation, sharpened her tone again. "Security, do your job. They've lingered long enough." The guards shifted, awaiting her nod. But even they hesitated, caught in the strange force of Elaine's stillness. Margaret's lips curled as she tried once more to command the room. "This is a private event, not a job fair. Remove them." Her words echoed, but their power seemed to waver against the calm figure standing tall in the very space she wanted erased. Elaine finally moved, but not as the family expected. She tilted her head slightly toward David, her voice low, firm, threaded with a promise that carried more weight than any outburst could. "We won't answer them here," she whispered, "but we will answer them." Long before chandeliers and marble foyers, Elaine Brooks walked cracked sidewalks in Newark. Her world was small but unshakably proud. Her mother worked 12-hour shifts as a nurse. Her father spent his days bent over engines in a garage that barely kept its doors open. The smell of motor oil clung to his hands, the sharp scent of disinfectant followed her mother home, and between them, they carried the weight of survival. Money was tight, But dignity was not negotiable. Elaine's grandmother often repeated the same refrain in their modest apartment. Never let anyone tell you where you belong. Respect is not given. It is carried, even when others try to strip it from you. Those words settled deep into Elaine, shaping the way she held herself, even as a child. At school, Elaine didn't just study. She fought for her place at the table. Straight A's weren't simply goals. They were proof that talent could not be denied. Scholarships followed, opening doors that were never meant to swing wide for a black girl from Newark. She entered lecture halls where she was the only one who looked like her, offices where her presence was mistaken for the assistant rather than the strategist. Each slight hardened her resolve. Every dismissal became fuel. David's path mirrored hers in different streets. He was the son of an accountant who worked night shifts to cover bills and a mother who ran a corner store with hands blistered from hauling boxes. Numbers came to him with ease, and finance became his language. He could see patterns where others saw confusion, risk where others saw profit, opportunity where others saw ruin. The two met not at a gala or a networking event, but at a community business forum in their 20s. She spoke of rebuilding forgotten neighborhoods. He spoke of restructuring failing banks, and together they realized their visions weren't separate. They were halves of the same design. Their first business deal was dismissed by larger developers as folly. It was a block of neglected buildings no one wanted, graffiti-covered walls, broken windows, forgotten tenants. But Elaine saw potential where others saw decay. She convinced David to back her instincts. They secured the property, rebuilt it brick by brick, and transformed it into affordable housing that quickly became the pride of the neighborhood. Within 3 years, the value had tripled. Success didn't soften them, it sharpened their ambition. Elaine kept her eye fixed on undervalued assets, properties in overlooked areas, factories left to rot, plots of land dismissed as useless. David ensured the numbers worked, turning vision into sustainable growth. Each win added weight to their empire. By their 10th year in business, they had expanded beyond real estate. David spearheaded investments in logistics hubs across the Midwest. Elaine forged partnerships with emerging tech firms ignored by the mainstream, pouring resources into manufacturing plants that created jobs instead of abandoning them. They moved steadily into renewable energy, solar, wind, infrastructure projects that anchored communities rather than hollowing them out. Every decision carried their fingerprint. Rebuild where others exploit, invest where others abandon, create opportunity where prejudice denies it. By year 20, Brooks Global wasn't simply a company. It was an empire worth over $60 billion. Their portfolio stretched from skyscrapers in Manhattan to shipping terminals in Singapore. Their influence reached into boardrooms once designed to exclude people like them. They employed thousands across the globe, their success undeniable, even to those who still refused to see them as equals. But Elaine never forgot her grandmother's lessons. Her offices, no matter how high the floor, always carried a single framed photograph of the woman whose calloused hands had once held hers. To Elaine, the wealth was not the victory. It was the dignity that had survived through generations and now stood unshaken in rooms designed to diminish her. Still, she knew money couldn't erase racism. She had been mistaken for staff in her own boardroom. Her ideas had been ignored until repeated by white male colleagues. She had been asked to fetch coffee at conferences where she was the keynote speaker. Power didn't protect her from prejudice. It only magnified the arrogance of those who believed skin color defined worth. That truth had followed her into the gala, where insults reigned as freely as champagne. The Whitmores believed a ruined gown meant a ruined presence. They thought humiliation could erase decades of discipline, sacrifice, and triumph. But Elaine Brooks had risen from streets meant to forget her. She had built an empire from bricks others had abandoned. She had carried dignity through every door slammed in her face. And now she stood in the very halls of those who mocked her, holding the kind of power they couldn't fathom. Because prejudice does not check bank balances. To the untrained eye, the Whitmores seemed untouchable. Their names were etched into society columns, their photographs printed beneath headlines celebrating charity galas and polo tournaments. The family's estates in the Hamptons glittered in glossy magazines. each shot of sprawling lawns and oceanfront mansions carefully staged to project permanence. At gatherings like the gala, their elegance was rehearsed as thoroughly as a performance, and every smile was meant to reassure the public that the Whitmores still reigned as one of New York's royal families of wealth. But the walls of marble hid rot. Charles Whitmore had inherited the empire with more confidence than competence. His father had thrived in an era when Manhattan towers filled quickly with corporate tenants and luxury hotels overflowed with travelers who spared no expense. But markets shift, and Charles was no visionary. As companies sought cheaper leases in other cities and travelers traded tradition for innovation, revenues thinned. Maintaining aging skyscrapers bled millions every quarter, yet Charles clung to them as though prestige alone could pay the bills. For years, he patched one debt with another. A tower was sold off to cover loans on a hotel. A retail property was liquidated to keep creditors quiet for another season. Each decision shrank the empire further, even as society pages continued to feature their gallivants. Behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. The Whitmores were circling the drain. Margaret refused to hear it. To her, the family's worth was measured not in profit and loss statements, but in the weight of their invitations. She clung to the social dominance like armor. The dinners, the photo shoots, the annual charity balls, those were her battlegrounds, and appearances were her ammunition. A guest list filled with senators and heirs meant survival. As long as she could keep the spotlight shining, she believed the cracks in their empire would stay hidden in the dark. It was a lie she told herself with conviction. Her children had learned it too. Brandon wore entitlement like a tailored suit, squandering trust funds on nightclubs and vacations, never once considering the fragility of the ground beneath him. Sophia polished cruelty into charm, mastering the art of whispers that tore others down while leaving her reputation unblemished. To them, wealth wasn't something that could vanish. It was a birthright. They mocked others without pause because it never crossed their minds that one day they might need mercy. But Charles knew the numbers, and the numbers did not lie. He spent his mornings with bankers and creditors, negotiating extensions he could not promise to repay. By night, he stood in tuxedos at Margaret's galas, smiling as though the empire weren't teetering on collapse. Each day was a performance, one he played less convincingly with every passing quarter. Then came the prospect of salvation, a merger with Brooks Global. $30 billion in cash and asset integration would erase their most dangerous debts. Properties that had become anchors could be lifted back into profitability under the Brooks name. Investors would breathe again. The Whitmores would retain their social crown, and Charles would be hailed as a man who secured his family's legacy instead of the heir who squandered it. Months of negotiations had been handled through legal teams and intermediaries. Charles had never met Elaine or David in person. In his imagination, the executive who commanded Brooks Global was a man who looked like him, older, white, familiar. That assumption comforted him, and it allowed him to ignore every warning sign that arrogance might cost him everything. Margaret saw the deal only as a means to continue hosting galas in homes that might otherwise be repossessed. She had no interest in the details, only in the image it would project once announced. The Whitmores aligned with one of the world's most powerful business families. To her, the partnership would be just another feather in her cap, proof that her family still reigned at the summit of society. Neither she nor Charles stopped to consider that respect might matter more than appearances. Neither paused to question whether humiliation could destroy trust faster than contracts could build it. And so, on the night of the gala, when Margaret sneered across the marble foyer, when Brandon lifted his glass in mockery, when Sophia whispered her venom for others to spread, none of them understood the gravity of their mistake. They believed they were guarding the sanctity of their circle. They thought mocking Elaine and David was a display of superiority that would reaffirm their place at the top. But in reality, they were severing the only lifeline their empire had left. The guests laughed, the champagne sparkled, and the Whitmores preened in the glow of their cruelty, never once realizing the truth. They mocked the only people who could save them. Wine dripped from the hem of Elaine's gown, dark trails staining the marble at her feet. The laughter around her swelled, cruel and eager, as though the humiliation of one woman had become the night's entertainment. Margaret Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, lips curled in a smile that spoke of victory. The guards moved closer, waiting for her order. One reached for Elaine's arm, but before he could touch her, she raised her phone. A simple gesture, calm, deliberate. The faint blue glow of the screen reflected in her eyes. For a moment, the room hushed, the laughter thinning into murmurs. Guests leaned forward, teary-eyed. Margaret tilted her head, amused, certain this was nothing more than a last attempt at saving face. Elaine pressed a single button and lifted the phone to her ear. Her voice, steady and unshaken, carried across the hall. "It's me. End it." The words were quiet, but the silence they created was thunderous. The guards froze, unsure. Margaret smirked, her diamonds catching the light as she waved her hand impatiently. "Enough of this theater. Escort her out." But the guards hesitated. Something in Elaine's composure unsettled them. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their phones, while others recorded more intently, sensing that the moment had changed. What had started as mockery was now unraveling into something different, something they didn't yet understand. Margaret stepped forward, heels clicking in perfect rhythm against the marble. "Do you think a phone call changes anything?" she sneered. "You don't belong in this room. Not tonight, not ever." Elaine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than Margaret's venom. She ended the call, lowered the phone, and simply stood, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the matriarch who believed humiliation could erase her. The whispers began. Guests who moments earlier had laughed now exchanged nervous glances. "Who is she calling?" one asked. Another muttered, "Why are the guards hesitating?" David remained at Elaine's side, his hand resting lightly against her back, the only visible sign of unity they needed. He didn't speak either. Together, their quiet refusal to bow transformed the energy of the room. Margaret's smirk faltered for the first time. She scanned the faces of the crowd, saw curiosity replacing laughter, and felt the balance she had always commanded begin to slip. Phones stayed high, but now they captured more than humiliation. They captured defiance. The footage was no longer about a woman being mocked. It was about a family so blinded by arrogance that they couldn't see the storm gathering in front of them. One of Brandon's friends, drunk and careless, slurred out a laugh. "She's bluffing. No one takes orders from her." His words hung awkwardly, falling flat against the silence that had crept back into the foyer. Elaine lifted her chin slightly, her calm presence pressing against every mocking word spoken that night. She didn't shout, didn't plead. She simply stood, and the longer she did, the more the Whitmore's power seemed to crumble. Margaret, refusing to yield, raised her voice. "Do you know who we are?" she demanded. "This is our house, our gala, our circle. You are nothing here." But the words rang hollow, brittle against the steel of Elaine's silence. Even those loyal to Margaret sensed it. They shifted uncomfortably, their laughter gone, their expressions uncertain. The waiters carrying trays of desserts paused near the doorway, caught in the tension. Guests glanced at one another, searching for cues, trying to decide whether to continue the charade or acknowledge the truth settling in the air. The woman they mocked was not ordinary, and this confrontation was not the victory the Whitmores imagined. Elaine finally leaned toward David, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "They think they're untouchable," she said, "but tonight will remind them." David gave a slight nod, the only response needed. Margaret gestured to the guards again, but neither moved. Their hesitation was no longer hesitation. It was recognition. Something about Elaine's demeanor, the phone call, the unshaken presence, told them this was not a woman to be manhandled like an unwelcome guest. The air grew heavier with each passing second. Guests who had been gleeful participants in her mockery now stepped back, unwilling to be caught on the wrong side of history. Phones recorded not just a scene, but evidence. Evidence that prejudice had just collided with power in a way none of them anticipated. By the time desserts were finally set on the tables, the whispers had changed. Laughter was gone, curiosity replaced it. Phones buzzed with texted questions, speculation filling the silence Margaret could no longer control. A woman near the staircase leaned close to her husband, her voice barely audible. "She's not just a guest, is she?" Another guest answered with the question that rippled through the room, carried from mouth to mouth until it reached every corner of the gala. Is she the CEO? The gala wound down with an unease that no music could disguise. What had begun as a glittering showcase of wealth ended in a silence heavier than velvet drapes. Guests drifted toward the exits, their laughter muted, their eyes lingering on Elaine and David with suspicion, curiosity, even fear. Phones buzzed constantly, clips of the confrontation already circling private chats, each replay framing Margaret's words against Elaine's unshaken presence. By midnight, the Whitmores' mansion was nearly empty. The staff gathered broken glasses, wiped crimson stains from the marble, and tried to restore order. But beneath the surface, chaos had already taken root. Charles Whitmore retreated to his study, his tuxedo loosened at the collar. For the first time in years, he sat without a mask of certainty. Numbers whirled in his head, the loans, the overdue payments, the merger papers sitting unsigned. He had spent months convincing bankers that Brooks Global would rescue their faltering empire. And now, his stomach turned as he replayed Elaine's calm phone call. Margaret stormed into the room, her pearls still glimmering beneath the chandelier, though her face had lost its polished calm. She embarrassed us in front of everyone, she spat. But they still need us. That deal will happen. No one walks away from the Whitmores. Charles didn't answer. He poured himself a drink, his silence more telling than any argument. He knew what Margaret refused to admit. It wasn't Brooks Global that needed them. It was the other way around. Upstairs, Brandon laughed with his friends, replaying the night on his phone as if it were just another story to boast about. "Did you see your face when the glass hit?" he shouted, ignoring the unease creeping into his companion's laughter. He was too drunk, too entitled to recognize that the joke no longer landed. Sophia scrolled through social media, her sharp eyes narrowing. Clips from the gala were spreading beyond their circle. Hashtags multiplied. Some comments mocked, but others asked questions. Who is she? Why did the guards stop? Why did Margaret look nervous? Sophia's polished composure faltered as she realized the story was slipping from their control. By morning, the media caught the scent. Blogs and tabloids latched onto the viral videos, first as gossip, then as scandal. Anonymous sources whispered that the mystery woman wasn't just a guest, that she was someone far more powerful. The footage replayed endlessly. Margaret's cutting words, Brandon's drunken toast, Sophia's whisper about the kitchen, followed by Elaine's poised phone call. Within 24 hours, the Whitmores' board members demanded answers. Bankers placed frantic calls. "Is it true?" they asked Charles. "Did you insult Elaine Brooks, the Elaine Brooks, CEO of Brooks Global?" Charles's silence confirmed more than he said. Panic rippled through their network. Investors who had been ready to celebrate a merger now whispered about disaster. Creditors tightened their patience. The empire's cracks spread wider. Margaret refused to bend. She stood before the family at breakfast, her voice sharp, her pride intact. "This is nothing more than a misunderstanding," she declared. "The world will see it for what it is. They need us as much as we need them. They'll come back to the table." But her words rang hollow. Charles stared at his untouched coffee, his mind already calculating the cost of failure. Brandon smirked, still blind. Sophia avoided eye contact, scrolling through comments that dismantled their reputation in real time. Behind their walls of marble and denial, the truth was no longer containable. Clips had reached business journals, then financial networks. Analysts debated on live television. Did the Whitmores just insult the very women who could erase their debts? Reporters camped outside their office towers, pressing executives for comments. The family name, once a shield, became a headline dripping with irony. Meanwhile, in a penthouse miles away, Elaine and David met quietly with their advisors. The atmosphere in their office contrasted sharply with the panic unraveling in the Whitmores' estate. No raised voices, no frantic scrambling, only calm deliberation. Elaine sat at the head of the table, her ruined gown now replaced with tailored resolve. David reviewed numbers with measured clarity. Their advisors presented updates. The viral clips, the media frenzy, the collapsing confidence in Whitmore Industries. Elaine listened without interruption, her expression steady. When the room fell silent, she spoke. "We will not answer them with anger. That is what they expect. We will answer them with precision." David nodded, his voice firm. They built their empire on appearances. We'll show them what happens when appearances can't hide the truth. The advisors exchanged looks of quiet respect. They all knew what came next would not be a reaction born of pride. It would be a strategy rooted in discipline. While the Whitmores scrambled to salvage dignity through denial, Blaine and David prepared their next move with the same steadiness that had carried them from cracked sidewalks to skyscraper boardrooms. And as the world speculated, the truth grew impossible to ignore. The couple mocked at the gala were not outsiders seeking approval. They were the very people holding the Whitmores' future in their hands. In boardrooms, power speaks in tones sharper than any insult. For Elaine and David, it had never been about volume or spectacle. Their style was steady, disciplined, a sharp contrast to the Whitmores' reliance on intimidation and appearances. Where Margaret wielded cruelty like a weapon, Elaine relied on clarity. Where Charles blustered through meetings with promises he couldn't keep, David came armed with numbers no one could dispute. Their strength came not from inherited wealth, but from the discipline of survival. Elaine's principle guided every decision she made. Respect isn't negotiable. She carried it into every room, refusing to shrink even when she was the only black woman at a table of men who assumed her presence was a mistake. David balanced her resolve with insight. He had seen enough of finance to know that arrogance often collapses faster than debt. Together, they moved with a steadiness that unnerved those who relied on theatrics. The Whitmores, by contrast, treated boardrooms like ballrooms. Margaret entered meetings as if she were arriving at a gala, expecting deference without substance. Charles leaned on the family name, convinced it was enough to secure deals long after the numbers stopped adding up. Brandon never showed up at all, wasting his appointments in nightclubs instead of offices. Sophia weaponized charm, her polished smile hiding the same disdain that poisoned her whispers at the gala. Blaine and David saw it for what it was, a family desperate to cling to a throne that had already collapsed beneath them. Yet the Whitmores still believed status could be wielded against anyone, including the very people positioned to rescue them. Days after the gala, Elaine sat in her office, city lights burning through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. The clips of humiliation had gone global. News anchors replayed Margaret's words. Commentators debated whether racism had just destroyed the last chance to save Whitmore Industries. Investors speculated. Banks pulled back. The arrogance of one night had become a case study in self-destruction. David placed a stack of reports in front of her. The numbers were blunt. Whitmore Industries was no longer teetering on the edge, it was tipping. Without Brooks Global, they had weeks, perhaps months, before foreclosure became headline news. Elaine scanned the reports, her expression unmoved. Then she looked at David, her voice calm but edged with the weight of her grandmother's lessons. Respect isn't negotiable. If we let them insult us in public and still hand them survival, what does that teach anyone watching? David leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady on hers. If we let this pass, they'll humiliate others tomorrow. They'll believe they can mock, belittle, and still profit, and the cycle repeats. He was right. This wasn't just about one night in a marble foyer. It was about every slight Elaine had endured in boardrooms where her name was ignored, every time David had been underestimated because of the color of his skin. It was about the thousands who looked to them as proof that dignity could survive prejudice, that power did not excuse cruelty. Elaine reached for her pen, sliding a document across the table. It wasn't the merger agreement. It was a draft, words that would carry further than any signed contract ever could. "This is how it ends," she said quietly. David studied the page. It wasn't written with anger. It was written with precision. Every line dismantled the Whitmores' facade. It detailed the withdrawal of Brooks Global from the $30 billion merger, outlined the reasons, rooted in respect, not revenge, and made it clear that integrity mattered more than profit. "Once this goes public," David said, his voice low, "their empire won't just crack. It will collapse." Elaine placed the pen down, her expression unshaken. "Then let it collapse. If arrogance can't learn respect, it doesn't deserve survival." The room fell quiet, the city humming below them. In that silence, the balance of power shifted. What began as a night of mockery was now becoming a statement the world would remember. The ink had not yet dried, but the decision was final. Elaine Brooks had drafted the words that would erase Whitmore Industries. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Brooks Global released its statement at dawn, the words sharp and unflinching. The $30 billion merger with Whitmore Industries was officially terminated. The reason given was simple yet devastating. Partnerships cannot exist without respect. Within minutes, the press erupted. Financial networks broke into live coverage, replaying the gala footage alongside the statement. Anchors dissected Margaret's words, Brandon's drunken mockery, Sophia's whispered insult. Commentators didn't frame it as a misunderstanding. They framed it as arrogance colliding with power and losing. By mid-morning, Whitmore Industries stock had fallen so sharply that trading was briefly halted. Bankers who had tolerated Charles's delays for years began calling in loans, their patience gone. Credit ratings collapsed. Properties once touted as jewels of Manhattan real estate became symbols of decline. The empire's foundation, built on appearances, cracked in full view of the public. Inside the Whitmore estate, panic splintered the family. Margaret stormed through the halls, her voice carrying sharp as glass. "They can't do this. We are Whitmores. We built this city." She ripped the statement from the printer, her nails digging into the paper as if she could tear the words themselves apart. "This is slander. This is theft. We'll sue them into the ground." But even as she raged, calls poured in from society friends distancing themselves. Invitations were rescinded, fundraisers suddenly at capacity. The social calendar she curated so obsessively emptied overnight. Her throne of appearances had been pulled from beneath her feet. Brandon, oblivious, drowned the chaos in champagne. He spent the day at a rooftop lounge laughing with friends about being trending online. Publicity is publicity, he boasted, unaware or unwilling to admit that the headlines were not flattering. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that the fortune funding his indulgence was already in freefall. Sophia took a different approach. She locked herself in her room, scrolling endlessly through social media feeds. She blamed the press for magnifying the humiliation, accused journalists of twisting the narrative, and complained to anyone who would listen that her whispered comment had been taken out of context. But every repost, every caption, every hashtag reminded her the world had already judged. And then there was Charles. He sat in his study, the curtains drawn, the phone ringing endlessly beside him. He didn't move to answer. He didn't rage like Margaret or deflect like Sophia. He didn't pretend like Brandon. He simply stared at the numbers glowing on his screen, watching the empire dissolve transaction by transaction. Properties devalued, accounts drained, shares dumped in panic. For decades, he had believed the Whitmore name alone could shield them. Now he understood the truth. There was no shield, not against arrogance, not against humiliation caught on camera, not against the cold reality that the only people capable of saving them had been mocked out of their own foray. By evening, news crews camped outside the estate gates. Reporters shouted questions into microphones, eager for a statement. None came. Margaret refused to leave her room. Sophia avoided the cameras. Brandon hid behind velvet ropes downtown. Charles simply sat in silence, the empire collapsing around him, too heavy to stop. On Wall Street, analysts called it a cautionary tale. "Whitmore arrogance destroyed Whitmore wealth," one headline read. "Racism cost $30 billion, declared another. Comment sections filled with debates, but the consensus was clear. This was more than a financial collapse. It was a reckoning. Across the city, Brooks Global's headquarters glowed with steady light. Employees gathered in offices, watching the news unfold. Some were stunned by the boldness of the statement, others quietly proud. Elaine and David had not just walked away from a deal, they had made an example. They had shown that dignity could not be negotiated, not even for billions. The world watched as the Whitmore's empire crumbled in real time. But for Elaine and David, the story was not finished, because they hadn't stopped at saying no. They built something bigger. The collapse of Whitmore Industries dominated headlines for weeks. Analysts dissected the fall, commentators replayed the gala footage, and the Whitmore name, once synonymous with luxury and power, became shorthand for arrogance undone. But while their empire crumbled, Elaine and David turned their gaze elsewhere. They had no interest in savoring the Whitmores' ruin. Their vision stretched far beyond revenge. Instead of pouring billions into propping up marble foyers and dying skyscrapers, Brooks Global redirected its capital into the communities that had once been overlooked. Blaine returned to New York, walking the same cracked sidewalks where her grandmother's words had shaped her. She announced a $2 billion initiative to build affordable housing, apartment complexes designed not as symbols of charity, but as anchors of stability. "These are not handouts," she told the press. "They are investments in dignity." The buildings rose quickly, staffed by contractors from the very neighborhoods they served. Artisans, carpenters, architects. Jobs multiplied. Families who had once struggled with eviction notices now signed leases for clean, modern apartments priced within reach. Where others saw neighborhoods not worth saving, Elaine saw the foundation of a stronger future. David pushed forward in Houston, where shuttered factories and abandoned warehouses dotted the landscape. He spearheaded the transformation of both sites into logistics hubs and renewable energy plants. Solar panels lined rooftops where pigeons had once nested, and wind turbines spun on land left unused for decades. Thousands found work, from technicians to truck drivers. Paychecks flowed into communities long written off by banks and developers. It wasn't about replacing one empire with another. It was about rewriting what power looked like. While the Whitmores measured influence in gala invitations and magazine spreads, Elaine and David measured it in lives changed, doors opened, and futures built where prejudice had once slammed them shut. Their philosophy became clear. Justice is not always punishment. Sometimes justice is redirection, taking resources hoarded by arrogance and placing them in the hands of those who had been ignored. The press followed every step. Headlines shifted from Whitmore collapse to Brooks' vision. From Newark to Houston, how Brooks Global is rebuilding America's forgotten communities. Interviews with tenants moving into the new housing complexes went viral. Families speaking of finally having stability, of children doing homework at kitchen tables instead of shelters. Workers at the Houston plant spoke of steady wages after years of uncertainty. For Elaine, it was more than strategy. It was personal. Each ribbon cutting, each groundbreaking, each job created echoed the sacrifices her family had made in Newark. It was proof that the lessons of dignity carried by her grandmother hadn't just survived. They had expanded into something that could not be mocked away. David articulated it best in a press briefing. Standing before a wall of cameras, he said, "Empires built on arrogance collapse, but communities built on respect endure." The applause that followed wasn't from shareholders in suits. It was from residents, workers, students, ordinary people whose lives were touched by the decisions of a couple who refused to bend under humiliation. Meanwhile, the Whitmores faded into obscurity. Margaret clung to her shrinking social circle, insisting that their names still meant something. Sophia avoided public appearances, haunted by the viral clips replayed in every corner of the internet. Brandon partied until the credit lines finally dried, his name whispered in tabloids, not as a socialite, but as a cautionary tale. And Charles, once the reluctant caretaker of his father's empire, retreated into silence, watching as foreclosure notices replaced invitations. But Margaret was not ready to surrender completely. The sting of public disgrace burned too deeply. For her, the Brooks redirection of power wasn't noble. It was salt in a wound. Each headline praising Elaine and David was another reminder that the people she tried to humiliate now stood higher than her family had ever dreamed. And so, in the shadows of bankruptcy and social exile, Margaret plotted one last attempt, not to rebuild her empire, it was gone, not to restore her reputation, that had dissolved, but to claw back relevance, even if it meant swallowing her pride. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling not from weakness but from desperation. For the first time in her life, she prepared herself to beg, because if she couldn't destroy the Brooks, she would attempt the one thing she had never done before: ask for their forgiveness. The meeting was arranged in secret. No cameras, no press, no grand foyer draped in chandeliers. Just a quiet conference room in a midtown office building, stripped of spectacle. For once, Margaret Whitmore did not arrive in pearls or silks. She came cloaked in desperation, her once perfect posture slightly bent, her voice rehearsed, but trembling underneath. Elaine and David entered together, their presence steady, commanding the room without effort. Margaret rose from her chair as if instinct compelled her to reclaim dignity, but the weight of the moment pressed her back down. For the first time in her life, she was not the host. She was the supplicant. "I came here," she began, her voice thin, "to undo what happened." She smoothed the papers in front of her, drafted pleas, revised apologies, numbers scribbled in the margins. The gala was unfortunate. Emotions ran high, but business is larger than misunderstandings. 30 billion is too much to throw away. Elaine folded her hands on the table. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fill the silence. She allowed Margaret's words to rattle against the walls, hollow as the empire they once propped up. Margaret tried again, sharper now, her pride pushing against the edge of collapse. "You need us. The city needs us. The Whitmore name has weight, heritage. Think of what we can build together. Forget that night. This deal can still happen." David leaned forward slightly, his voice measured, unshaken. "Forget? Is that what you ask? That night wasn't an accident. It was who you are when you think power shields you." Margaret flinched but pressed on. "We can issue a joint statement, smooth things over. The media will move on. You can't let one mistake destroy decades of legacy." Elaine's eyes remained steady, her tone calm, almost gentle, but resolute. "You destroyed your legacy with your own hands. You mocked the very people holding your salvation. You proved to the world that respect means nothing to you. And without respect, no empire survives." Margaret's breath caught, her carefully rehearsed words unraveling. "Please," she whispered, the word foreign in her mouth. "You can't just let us fall." Elaine's gaze softened, not with pity but with clarity. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of every lesson her grandmother had instilled, every insult endured in silence, every boardroom where she fought for her place. "Respect is priceless. You can't buy it with 30 billion. The words landed heavier than any verdict. Margaret slumped back, the realization settling over her like ash. There was nothing left to barter. No gala, no surname, no inheritance could shield her now. The meeting ended not with signatures, but with silence. Elaine and David rose, walked out, and never looked back. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore names slipped from the society pages. Their towers were sold at auction, their estates foreclosed. Their family whispered about not as powerhouses, but as relics of arrogance undone. Brandon's laughter disappeared from nightclubs when the money ran dry. Sophia's whispers no longer held weight in rooms where her family name had become a cautionary tale. Charles retreated into shadows, watching as the last bricks of his inheritance crumbled. And Margaret, once the queen of marble foyers, faded into obscurity. Remembered only for the night she mocked the wrong woman. Elaine and David rose higher, but not in the way the Whitmores had measured power. Their empire grew because it was rooted in dignity, not in cruelty. New York's housing projects thrived, Houston's energy hubs expanded, and scholarships bearing Elaine's grandmother's name lifted young voices that might otherwise have been silenced. Their wealth was undeniable, but their legacy was carried in something far greater. Respect earned, not demanded. The world remembered not their billions, but their refusal to bend when humiliated. They had shown that justice could be firm without rage, decisive without cruelty, and enduring beyond wealth. If you've ever seen arrogance crumble before truth, you know this story. Respect is never optional. Before you leave, like this video, subscribe and tell me, where are you watching from?